just search our podcast title and follow us on Facebook, on YouTube, subscribe over there, and jump on the live stream, comment on the topics that we're discussing in real time, um, and you'll have control over the direction the episode heads.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, number 3, uh, send money to our Venmo account. Uh, it's at official John Smith. Um, I'm not joking, bro. I haven't talked with you about this yet. Our website's under construction right now, so there's
Mm-hmm.
no merch available. Um, Actually, you know what? That's a flat out lie. I just remembered this. We have an Etsy page.
Yeah.
I'm gonna link the Etsy page in the description of this episode.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, you can support us by buying if you want to support us financially. Our website or our Etsy page, and find you some good clean merch, man. It's the same price
Mm-hmm.
over there as it would be over on our website. It's just
Yeah.
another option as we navigate through this trying time.
Yeah.
So, um,
We're just doing a little bit of reorganizing, some reshuffling, some transitions, but it's all good. We
yep,
always have something.
nope, well, uh, the shop is empty for some reason. That's unfortunate.
Well, either way, you can support us easily by continuing to watch us. You can check us out on our YouTube page, of course, like John already talked about. You can give us a like on there because that helps out a ton, like you already said. But I want to really iterate that a lot of this is to help us grow, not just on Facebook, not just on some of the other platforms that we have, some of the other podcasting platforms, but even on YouTube, which is another way that we can grow our audience to be bigger and even help us get to a point to where we can do more than just the podcast, which we have done in the past. We've tried to take you guys along whenever we have our own little trips and stuff like that.
Yeah,
And we want to try to do more of that in the future. So showing your support and when we do have our Etsy page working perfectly fine, as well as when we transition and move back over to our website, is these are amazing ways for you to be able to support us on the show. You can also throw some bits in, some stars. I think it actually is for Facebook, which is another great way to help us out on these live streams. It's just another great way for us to interact with you, as well as for you to interact with us. And you're even showing us your support through here as well. So all those ways are great. Um, we really appreciate it, and we really just love hearing from you guys, whether it be through comments, emails, all sorts of stuff, or even in the live chat. So just wanted
absolutely.
to throw that out there.
I couldn't have said it better myself. So thank you for taking the reins there, man.
Yeah, of
Um,
course.
yeah. So yeah, we'll get the Etsy shop updated. But in the meantime, everything Denison says holds true. And yeah, really, Facebook has this new feature on here called Stars,
Hmm.
which is basically, I think, 500 stars is $5. It's kind of how it works. And you
Yeah,
guess,
yeah.
yeah, you get a certain amount of stars per um uh
Per live stream.
term, right? For free
Hmm.
that you don't have to do anything with. And so yeah, I mean, just if you're interested, you can support us that way. So let's go ahead
Hmm.
and get into our topic, man.
Yeah.
Picking up on these water wars. I know one of the things that you wanted to talk about was the wildfires in England. I've seen that
Hmm.
because of a few, more famous people, excuse me, um, that I follow that are from England, posted a lot about these. These wildfires were rampant everywhere,
Yeah.
and there wasn't much that was able to be done about them. So yeah, what did you want to say about that?
Yeah, yeah, no, I mean, that's one thing. You said that there wasn't much that they could do about it other than just, your typical wildfire changes. But it sounds weird for us to hear that, I think, in kind of like America, where we do deal with wildfires on a semi-regular basis. But for them, right, they don't get wildfires. Like that's not a normal thing. I mean, for anybody who has gone to England, or really is you notice that their climate is very not dry.
Right.
It's usually very, very rainy. So it's very surprising for them to get into a position to where um, they actually have severe enough of a drought, right, or even dry enough of ground for a wildfire to be even able to appear. So that's kind of crazy, right? And
Yeah.
if you really think about it, this all kind of comes together or culminates with the strange changes that we saw, earlier this summer, that they had with their temperature, right? They
Sure.
reached a temperature that they have never reached before. They were hitting records essentially, um, and their climate is not something that gets this type of stuff.
Yeah.
It's just not in their normal climate pattern. Now, of course, climates change, right, over time, but a lot of that can come from uh, these global warming aspects that we have. And so droughts are another thing. I think one of the biggest things that it's really hard for everybody to understand, and it's hard for me to understand. I'm still learning about this every day, but it's
Sure.
it's not just that it gets hotter on the Earth's temperature, but it's those slight changes in heat that have such a widespread change, right? So
Yeah.
we're seeing in England, right, or even a lot of places in Europe who are also suffering part of some form or of drought. I think I saw a statistic out there that was saying that about 60% of Europe is in some form of drought,
Oh wow.
which is crazy, right?
It is.
That normally their climate usually doesn't get that type of way.
Yeah.
So yeah, so for them to see anything like that, it's a very interesting. But yeah, like it has far reaching things like water, like we have, like we've been talking about. But it's also changes in weather. So where you do get water, like we were talking about last week, but it's a dump of water to where the
Yeah.
ground isn't able to even process that, and so it culminates in flooding, right? To big, big floods. I mean, even years ago, I think it was actually last year, I think it was Germany that suffered a really bad flood,
Mm.
which they weren't prepared for because they don't usually get that type of stuff.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that was kind of one of my things. And I wanted to ask you about it. Like, have you ever, uh, have you ever thought of like this kind of stuff to even show up in the UK?
Well, no, I mean, because that's the thing is you don't really think of the UK for extreme heat, extreme temperatures. I think what people don't really realize too is that France in those areas, man, they have extremely hot summers. You know what I mean? Um, and so it does get hot over in Europe. But I think what's so funny is like you hear global warming and all this, but like people only tend to think America, you
Yeah,
know. But it happens all over the world. And so no, there are a couple of reasons I wouldn't think that that would happen in Europe or in England specifically. And that's because, they're known for it being so rainy all the time.
yeah,
Yeah. That's kind of what it's known for. It's very humid climate. Um, and they'll have hot stretches of summer. But what's crazy is I do remember talking about this, I believe, in a solo episode I did, where their climate predictions for 2050 are already happening.
yeah,
Um, Now, the difference is over there um, that it would be normal by 2050. Right now, it's still extreme. But what's
exactly.
what's scary is the extreme could become normal. Well, the infrastructure wasn't ready to handle it. There wasn't enough um, to saturate the ground
Hmm.
um, and put those fires out. And so that I think that's what's concerning to me is thinking about down the line. This could be an even bigger issue. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And the effect of wildfires has a wider reach, because essentially, right, that you're also taking water from the water supply.
Yeah,
And then if you're handling a lot of droughts, a lot of wildfires, your water supply becomes smaller and smaller for you to be able to actually use. And that's kind of where we were talking about last week, where it's like we need to start making some changes to try and mitigate some of that stuff, um, before it gets too bad. Because, like you said, uh, these extreme events are going to become more and more frequent to where it's more of a normal thing.
yeah. Well, I think what's kind of bringing it back to here real fast. A lot is going on in California right now. They have extreme temperatures well above 100
Hmm.
all the way up and down the state, man.
Hmm.
You know, and so like the thing about that is they haven't had enough water, enough resources for years. I mean, they're
Yep.
already having to consider rolling blackouts just from the heat that is now. And I realized we're talking about water on this one. Like, yeah, I want to stay with that, stay true to that, of course. But it is concerning to see these resources be stretched so thin already, because we know the state of infrastructure, right? And so that does include processing and um, sharing water.
Yep. Yep.
Uh,
Also, hydropower, which we've been hearing about in the news for quite a while, with the Hoover Dam, from the Hoover Dam,
yeah,
and Lake Mead being considerably getting smaller and smaller, the amount of water that's there,
yeah.
and I
Did
think
you
even
know?
getting, or go ahead, yeah.
Did you know that a couple hundred more feet, and which I know sounds like a lot, but at the rate that's been falling, this could happen in the next 8 to 10 years, or even less. But if Lake Mead goes down much further, the induction engines, or whatever you would call those, but the engines on the Hoover Dam
Hmm.
would be over the top of the water, dude.
That's crazy.
It is crazy to think about, and concerning because that has been an institution of our um, infrastructure for so long. But
Yep.
even more than that, man, what's actually concerning too is the Colorado River plays such a major role in providing fresh drinking water to so many people, but also just just the environment.
Hmm.
Just the role it plays on the environment. Yeah, it
Yeah.
is concerning.
It's very concerning. And then you also have to think about too, like, um, you know, it sounds weird, but it's something that I've been uh, learning more and more about. But even as we kind of shift more towards renewable energies and stuff like that, a lot of those renewable energies require some sort of like always going type of power, right? With a lot of those, because you've got solar power, you got wind power, which both of those have their peaks, right? Wind power is when when it's really windy. Solar power is when it's super sunny or whatever like that. But whenever you lose that super sunny or windy uh, time frame or whatever like that, you need to have something that's a baseline power deal, baseline power delivery to keep us going. And one of the solutions that have been added up, is of course batteries. But then there's also a talk of using an old style battery, which would essentially be running water up a, you know, essentially up a mountain, right? Storing it there and then releasing that water down, um, and then using the energy that's created from that to essentially power um, the turbines, which essentially give us power.
Right.
And so, using that type of cycle, and if water becomes so scarce, right, to a point to where we can't even employ those batteries, it can become a big problem. So it's this water issue isn't just something that we have to deal with where it's fresh drinking water, but it's also things that can stifle innovation for the future
Yeah.
that we don't really think about either.
Yeah. I want to interrupt this program real quick to
Mm.
announce that the Etsy page is now live again.
Okay.
Everything is back live. And you can find it linked wherever you're listening or watching, even on the live stream right now. You're gonna see every item that we have is the thumbnail will be black, but there are a huge variety of color options for every single item. So check that out. It is live. Anyway, yeah. So I think there's just so many different examples um, that we could talk about.
Yeah.
Why is there a concern about it getting worse? Obviously, we know the temperatures, right? We expect those to climb. We expect um, the global warming to get worse, of course.
Hmm. Hmm.
But man, let me ask you though. So the other factor about it has to be population growth too, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're right.
And
Population
this,
growth.
sorry, let me clarify.
No, go ahead.
This is in regard to having access to fresh drinking water and having enough to where you're not having to do things like in Jackson, Mississippi, where you're having to ration,
Yep.
drinking water, right?
Yep. 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 Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, you're right. It's that is a big proponent to it. As your population grows, as well as your population grows in a very specific tight knit area, the water being transported to that becomes water demand on that grows, right? As well as not having proper policies to um, ration water out in a good manner, um, that can become a big issue. Um, and as these droughts become, or as these droughts can either become longer, right? Because I think the drought that we were seeing in the West, we may just now be hearing about it, but it's actually been going on for quite some time now,
yeah,
just in various stages. Um, but essentially, for these droughts to last longer and to cause more damage, it becomes harder and harder for us to recover. So it's. I think that's probably one of the bigger concerns is that when we do get water, we have to be very good at utilizing that water properly.
mhm,
And then at the same time, when we don't have water, we need to be very good at conserving that water properly. um,
yeah,
I think a lot of places are going to have to start taking in some of the uh, practices that are done in more arid climates to
sure,
um, be able to properly manage that water demand.
yeah,
Um, so, I mean, I think that's probably one of the bigger things that's going to exacerbate, as well as the heating conditions that we have, or the rising of heat that we're going to have to worry about too.
yeah,
Um, which another thing that comes into play too is um, land will become, this is still kind of going into the water wars vein. It goes less outside of the drought realm, but more inside of the freshwater vein of, as global warming continues and ice caps start to melt more, um, that means rising temperatures, or not sea temperatures. I mean, yes, of course, sea temperatures are rising, but I mean rising sea levels,
Yeah.
um, which can also exacerbate the issue because one, um, say you have certain parts of land that is just going to be fully engulfed by water. Like, essentially you can think of it as like the edges of the United States, right? If those shrink, that means you're going to be forcing more people into a far more populous area to escape those other regions, as well as any sort of water storage that was around those areas, are now essentially going to be lost to the sea, um, in that same regard, uh, which I think a lot of people don't really think about as well.
Yeah. Well, I agree. I think a lot of people uh I think about this a lot. Just especially because I was coming back on a cruise at the time and I saw the backside of the storm, not knowing what it was.
Hmm.
But Hurricane Harvey, man, I mean, if that's not like a warning sign of what's possible, then I don't know what is. I mean, that thing
Hmm.
literally defied the laws of nature and parked right over Houston.
Yep.
Um, just insane. I don't, I've never, I mean, no one's ever seen anything like that. But yeah, I think about with the right, and I thought of that because of the rising sea levels, but uh, or the rising sea temperatures.
Hmm.
But I know that there's been talk in regard to getting access to fresh drinking water of converting salt water into fresh water. And
Yeah,
I know
desalination.
desalination. I know that on some level that already happens,
Hmm.
uh, but on a mass, drinking water scale, it does not. Um, so let's kind of reiterate first what it would take for us to get to a point where we would need that. First of all, it would be these continued droughts, this continued strain on our resources for wildfires and things along those lines,
Hmm.
a growing population with aging infrastructure that's not always reliable because, as we talked about a little bit last week, um, you know, we're looking at breaks in water mains and things like that. So these are all factors that play into this, right? Again, with the idea of it only getting worse, that would push us to try and do desalination. Yeah.
Hmm.
Um, so, to me, I have a concern about that because there's two
Mm.
things for me. We don't know how using ocean water in a mass level could or would impact the aquatic ecosystem, right?
Yeah.
Now, I realize that there are quadzillion gallons of water in the ocean. Like, it's not even fathomable how much water is there. I understand that, but still, a lot of these times that we mess with nature, we don't really know or don't expect an impact until it's far too late.
Yep.
Um, but the other thing I wanted to note was, um, is that healthy? You know, and
Hmm.
not only is it healthy, but is it really not solving the issue, but it's just moving the goalpost again, as we always tend to do with climate change or related needs like that.
Yeah, I that's a great question. Or even, um, I think in my opinion, I feel like it is just a move of the goalpost, because we're not really, like you said, we're not solving the issue. We're just uh, making sure that it doesn't affect us at that point in time. I think one of the good things about it is that desalination, at least in its current form, is relatively expensive, because the amount of energy that it takes a lot of energy to separate essentially the salty water from the actual fresh water or whatever like that. We're separating the salt from the water. But yeah, I mean, it also can have a huge impacts on the ecosystem as well, because what do we do with the actual, the I think they called it brine, which is the actual very very salty water, essentially the water that is the stuff that we can't get out. So it's all that extra salt, so it's super salty water.
Sure.
What are the effects of us pushing that out into back into the ocean? Like, what can that cause? What effects can that cause?
Yeah.
um, so that is something that is a big concern as well. I don't know exactly how feasible this is. Now, this is more going into a theoretical thought process, but it's always something that did fascinate me. And of course, this is still another moving the goalpost thing, but it's um, extracting or being able to use the fresh water that is slowly being distributed into the oceans because of global warming, because you have these ice caps that are melting, right? And if I'm not mistaken, the water that is in the ice caps are fresh water. Um,
Well,
it's
yeah,
not
it has to be.
yeah, it's not actual salt water.
Yeah.
So, and if I'm not mistaken, salt water and fresh water don't actually mix. Not really. They don't mix very well. Um,
Right.
and so, it was always a thought process of mine is, it's not great that we're doing this, but what if we do extract some of that fresh water, if it's even possible, um, since it will be in some ways already separated out, um, as like a stopgap measure. But I don't know if
Yeah.
that's even something that is possible. Of course, we'd
I
have
don't
to
know,
find
man.
like the deposits of the fresh water and all that other good stuff. But
Yeah.
I could see something like iceberg harvesting that we do.
Well,
That would be interesting.
but isn't that just adding to a problem that we already have?
It
Or
is,
is
but
would it be solving it? Because those ice caps melting are what's causing the ocean to rise.
yes, yes, very true. But again, it's just another moving of the goalpost, because you're not actually solving the issue, the big issue is us being able to lower the global temperature, which would mean that we would slow down the rate in which we are losing our ice caps and stuff like that. Um, but it can be something more along the lines of a uh, slow down, right? As we're still doing the correct things to make sure that we don't have to worry about this in the future, but
Yeah.
it's also something that can be a of great benefit to us in our current state. But of course, we don't know what type of environment that could be already in those big giant ice caps that we would be harvesting. And in my thought process of it um, would be like hard ice caps that are already kind of away. They're already kind of just floating. They're essentially glaciers, right?
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
are just floating in the ocean, and then we just grab them somehow. And I don't know.
Well, my concern is, man, what if we find Captain America's ship inside one of those icebergs, dude? That'd be crazy.
Well, I mean, hey, we have ourselves an Avenger in our hands, so that'd be great, right?
The world's first Avenger, dude. Yeah.
Yeah.
That wouldn't be a bad thing. Um, yeah, so let me see. What else did you want to touch on in regard to this? I know we were wanting to discuss on it more of a world standpoint, which we kind of have, but
Yeah, no, I mean, I think on a world stage, I think one of the biggest things is just making sure that we have everyone on board for the necessary changes that will be needed in the future, which I think is going to be probably the hardest thing out there, um, because we as humans, we don't really, I mean, it's what we got. What got us into this situation now, currently, is that we don't really think super long term.
yeah,
Um, we think short term, and a lot of that is just due to we're on a planet that has been around for billions of years, um, and or yeah, I think billions. I don't know.
yeah,
but yeah, billions of years, and yeah, our lifespans in the grand scheme of things is not long at all. It's
Right.
super duper small, um, and super duper short. Uh, so it's hard for us to think super super far out there. You know, even a century or 2 centuries ahead. We're really only thinking maybe a decade at most ahead. Um, and that's kind of a hard thing to do, um,
Well,
because I think. Or so go ahead. Yeah.
well, I was just going to say to your point. I mean, that is quick, especially in the grand scheme of how long the Earth has been here, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Mm-hmm. Um, but I think our big goalpost right now is right is like you kind of talked about earlier, is to make sure that when we get to the 2050 kind of, in some ways, doomsday scenario of these extreme weather patterns, extreme heat, extreme cold patterns, because that is another thing. Cold uh, weather can be extremely cold as well. Global warming, that doesn't always mean, oh man, our winters are going to get cooler,
yeah,
or they're going to get warmer. Sometimes it can be on both extremes.
sure,
Um, but essentially, it's really to see if we're able to adapt enough and change ourselves enough to where we don't get to that 2050 moment of where um, the the extreme heat, of the UK having 100-degree weather days or whatever like that. 100-degree uh, days is like a normal thing for them, and more along the lines of it goes back to where it was before, or even say that's still part of the extreme, right? If we can keep our climate to a point where it is now, which isn't great, but it's better than where it can go. I think that would be one of the biggest jumps that we can kind of do, to going back to the water portion to lower that problem,
yeah.
as well as new innovations that we can do.
So I want to take a step back for a moment too. Um, what this water war conversation? First of all, I know this is kind of backtracking, but the water wars idea is kind of envisioning a Mad Max type of situation where it's kind of post-apocalyptic sounding, right?
Hmm.
Um, and we're all struggling and fighting each other for basic resources. Maybe not all out actual combat, but some sort of battle for those resources, right?
Yeah.
It seems like this topic of conversation kind of came up out of nowhere. But what was it really that brought this up and made people start talking about, water wars? Because
Hmm.
really, it just seems like you hear about it everywhere now.
I think it's just been, to be honest, I think the biggest stuff is the stuff that we've been seeing with like mead. The massive drought that's been happening in the West. Um, that has been occurring, but I think it's starting to get to a really high point as of late, because of it's on a much larger scale, and it's an easier thing, right? Because it's not just Lake Mead, right? It's the Colorado River that's getting that's shrinking in size, which doesn't just help, say, California, but it also helps essentially every environment that it touches. So that's shrinking down. And then the big plan that certain that is out there of diverting other rivers, right, to feed into other places, so that way you'd have a water pipeline, right, where water becomes that new commodity. Water becomes almost as um, valuable as oil.
Sure. Yeah. So it's really those shortages that are causing this to already be brought up. It's these things that we've already talked about.
Exactly.
The drought in the West and infrastructure problems in Jackson, Mississippi, Mississippi, and then yeah, these things like Lake Mead, which for clarity, Colorado River feeds into Lake Mead, right?
Yeah.
So, um, in case people didn't know that out there, but yeah, that is why this has been brought up, and I know that there are a lot of other places in the world. Australia is a great example, right?
Yep.
They've been dealing with drought for a long time, and they've had areas where they've had to concern water usage. You know,
Hmm.
they have. In fact, I saw a lot of Aussies were kind of making fun of the British people earlier this summer. Oh, it's 100 degrees. Oh, poor babies, blah, blah, blah. But, their infrastructure is not built for that kind of heat. It's
Yep.
not. A lot of people have window unit ACs. You know,
Hmm.
they don't have a whole house unit because typically in the summer it's 80s, high 80s, that kind of a thing, right?
Hmm.
These
Hmm.
extreme temps brought up to over 100 with, no central heating and air for a lot of places
Yeah,
and no
exactly. And
well
then you
and
also have to think about their humidity too.
yeah, no insulated windows or those type of things to keep the heat from coming in. um so just a number of things to think about. It's going to impact everyone differently if the heat continues to rise and the water continues to decrease. um Honestly, the majority of America would probably be well suited for this. um we have tons of natural and man-made reservoirs. Um, but the fact is, things like the Colorado River, everyone should be paying attention to that
Hmm.
because that feeds millions of people. You know,
Yep, exactly.
so yeah, interesting stuff. Definitely glad we talked about it. And continued the discussion on it. So, do you have anything else you want to add? I had one other thing I wanted to mention.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the only other thing that I wanted to really add was just is just the usage. I think what we really need to hammer too is that um, you know, going back to like the Colorado River and stuff like that, um, there are other as more locations, right, start to suffer drought conditions. Um, there can be a process of because I even remember, a few years ago when Texas was having, it's been more than a few years, but Texas was having, their own really big drought, which Texas does ebb and flow between, being super high drought and then kind of going outside of a drought and jumping back in and stuff
Oh
like
yeah,
that.
we had a 7 year drought when we were growing up. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah, I remember that. That was crazy.
it was crazy.
But I remember that there were talks of trying to, get a pipeline from the Colorado River, right, and having that feed into Texas to help with crops and stuff like that. Because that's the other thing that we don't think about too is that the water isn't just there for, our consumption, but it's also there. For a lot of systems, of course, your plumbing and stuff like that, but it's also for irrigation, which is necessary for crops.
Yeah,
And if there are crops that say use too much water and there is a water shortage, those crops will be farmed at a lower amount, which then at that point can feed into food shortages.
yeah,
Um, or even just, at first it'll be food prices changing and then it'll be food shortages. um, and so that's another issue that I think is also another thing that kind of gets overlooked.
yeah. I agree. It's a lot to factor in. A lot of people need to take this seriously because this and the temps. I mean, these are the biggest things that we're facing today. So, man, no, good discussion on this. I want to throw
Hmm.
out something.
Yeah.
What if we start a new thing where we just share something pop culture that interests us from the past week, dude?
Yeah, of course.
All right.
I like that.
Cool. So for me, it is a new song by our friend up here named Blaine B.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he has a song called Carousel. The chorus says "Carousel around my mind," and the song is kind of like a carousel around my mind. I can't get it out of my head, dude. It's a great song, and my friends worked on it, so I wanted to throw that out there
Mm-hmm.
as well. So just Blaine B, Blayne. I've shown Denison a ton of his songs,
Mm-hmm.
um, and yeah, it's called Carousel. So anyway,
All right.
that's had my attention this week.
That's had your attention. Let's see,
Yeah.
pop culture wise, that's had my attention. Um, I think it's been like the weird speculations of Tom Brady and his wife having, marital issues or whatever like that.
What? I did not see this, bro.
Yeah, well, I've been seeing like random articles talking about stuff like that where they've been having some marital issues or something similar to that. Now, it could all be speculation, right? Um, Not saying that it's verified or anything like that, but I have seen some articles that have talked about that. So,
Yeah, yeah. Um, According to thespun.com,
oh, the spun. Oh.
thespun.com, they she's back with Tom in their home, but they have not reconciled yet.
Oh man. Oh man. See, maybe that's where I saw some of that stuff. It's
She's
just
upset
headline.
that he's continued to play football, dude. What? I mean, okay, come on. She's waiting until the week of the home opener, and she's like, you know what? I'm pissed.
I'm leaving. I can't
No,
do
man. Tabloids were just sitting on this until now. That's all it was.
this.
That's crazy.
hmm
That's crazy. Um, God, that's so funny, dude. Yeah, I only see that one article, but
Yeah, yeah. Actually, you know what? Just a quick throw out too is the also the is Elon Musk's I guess semi mistress, maybe not mistress anymore,
yeah.
thing where she had twins by him, but apparently now she's saying that they were they used fertilization to do that instead of doing the devil's tango to achieve those children.
The Devil's Tango.
The devil's tango, man.
Man, what the? Okay, so they're not his kid?
No, no, it's they're his kids, but according to at least an article that I saw, they use in vitro fertilization. That's the way it's said. I think that's what it's called. To fertilize her eggs, so that way, instead of using the devil's tango to be able to achieve the same results. So essentially,
Yeah.
he took his specimen and then they did that from there.
Gotcha, gotcha, gotcha. Yeah, because he's a
hmm
busy guy, bro. He doesn't have
He
time.
is a busy guy. He doesn't have time. Yeah.
No, he doesn't have time for that. I looked up the Devil's Tango on
Oh.
Urban Dictionary.
Uh-oh.
When a person sleeps with another person, they move a lot in their sleep, so they wake up in completely different positions.
Huh.
that's, the
That's
most,
a
that's the most PG approach that you could ever.
yeah, exactly. That's the newest way I've ever I haven't heard of that one. All
They're
right. That's a
genuinely
great way
sleep.
to describe it.
Yep, they're sleep, but they are restless sleepers, dude. Um,
Just super restless.
yeah, that's amazing. So, all right, guys. Well, this has been a fun episode. We touched on a lot. Um,
hmm
appreciate y'all jumping on here on the live stream, leaving some likes, leaving some thoughts. So we'll be back next week with another episode, and looking forward to that one. But thank you guys. You know what? Actually, I want to. I'm gonna do this weekend. We talked
hmm
many months ago about the multiverse, right? The actual multiverse, not the Marvel Studios multiverse,
Yeah.
and string theory. And I said that we should reach out to a physicist at Wichita State. Have yet to do that. I'm going to do that this week. We'll see if we can get them on for an
Mm-hmm.
upcoming episode. So that'd be a lot of fun to talk about that
Yeah,
kind of stuff.
yeah, it'd be amazing.
So cool. All right. Well, thank you guys for listening. Thank you for watching. And we'll catch up with you next week.